All right, good morning, everybody. I want to thank you for joining us in what is our sixth installment of the COVID-19 series of webinars. So for those of you that are new to this webinar series, my name is Jason Flynn, and I am the Director of Human Resources and Client Services for Prestige Employee Administrators. Along with me this morning is Carol Sawyer, who is our tax manager here at Prestige. We are also very lucky to have with us again today two active members of the NAPIO community, and they will be giving us an update on the latest news that is out there today. It's nice to have Andrew Lubash join us again, who is involved with NAPIO for the past 5 years and is the current chair. Andrew is also the principal of Prestige. And for the first time, we'd like to introduce Daniel Harris, who is the Vice President of State Government Affairs at NAPIO. As for today's agenda, Andrew and Daniel will be kicking things off this morning with some regulatory updates. Then Carol will be taking over and providing some updates on the Paycheck Protection Program loan forgiveness. Then we'll go through what's been a hot topic lately these days, which is the return to work for employees. Lastly, we'll take you through some frequently asked questions as we wrap up the webinar today. So, as a reminder, all participants will be muted throughout the webinar. However, if you do have a question, I urge you to use the question and answer feature within the webinar and direct the question to the panelists. We'll do our best to answer all the incoming questions. A copy of the presentation will be available on the COVID-19 Resource Center of the Prestige website following the webinar.
Jason, am I up? Stan Harris.
Hi, Dan, I am sorry. I just kind of went on this long tangent and didn't realize that I myself was muted. So
it's all right. You want me to pick up from here?
Just a typical Wednesday morning here. No, normally we're rolling along pretty strong. But as I was going through, I was just kind of making the introduction to you, Daniel. I was just going through the fact that, we have Daniel Harris with us today. He's currently the Vice President of State Government Affairs at NAPIO. His role is typically to lead the development and execution of a legislative and regulatory program in all 50 states. And Daniel was nice enough to join us today to give us some updates. So, Daniel, I'm going to be very happy right now to pass the microphone over to you.
All right, great. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining into Prestige PEO. Thanks very much for having me. It's an honor to be able to deliver this presentation to everyone. As Jason was saying, I've been at NAPIO for about 6 years now. NAPIO is the National Trade Association for Professional Employer Organizations, of which Prestige is a prominent member. I'm sure Jason told you, but Andy, I know him as Andy, not as a government Andrew name. But Andy's been heavily involved in NAPIO for a number of years now. When I first started, he was actually the chair of the State Government Affairs Committee. He's been on the board numerous times, and he's actually the chair of the board right now. So you all are in good hands with Prestige. So just real quick about NAPIO, like I said, we're the National Trade Association. We're domiciled in the DC area in Alexandria, Virginia. It's home to many national trade associations. We do a number of things for the PEO industry. The most important thing we provide is information. So as issues develop throughout the country that affects the PEO industry, we are the first and pretty much the only resource out there for our member organizations. We provide conferences and webinars like this and educational events. But I think one of our most important roles out there, particularly during this time of the pandemic, is making sure that our members are completely up to speed. I know you heard, if you're an avid joiner of this series that Prestige has been putting on, you heard from my colleague, Tom Stoller, who discussed what was going on federally as far as their response to this pandemic. So I'll leave that up to him. There's talk that they are coming back and they will consider more measures, but that's still a little bit up in the air right now. I think everyone knows sort of the status of our politics. in DC right now, but I believe they'll continue as long as this pandemic goes on. They'll continue to come back and pass more laws to help more employers and folks out. So that's essentially what we've done. Let me tell you a little bit about what I do at NAPIO. I handle state government affairs. I have a team of about 2 folks, and we provide information about what's going on from all 50 states related to PEOs and employers like yourself. So what I'll do I'll only focus on 2 states, just New York and New Jersey. But during the course of that, I will give you hopefully what both of these states have done, what they're doing, and the path forward for both of these states. But I'll hopefully be able to let you know how that fits within the national landscape. So let's go to the next slide. So one thing I forgot to mention, it's very important to note that most states, once this pandemic really hit and started to affect their states, they were already out. Their legislatures were already out, right? They had already adjourned officially for the session. So a lot of them were already out. For those that weren't out, they postponed meeting in person, which means they weren't able to get a lot of work done. For those that are out, their legislative session, it's already done. Really, they can only come back once the governor orders it. So what a lot of states have done to actually affect laws or do administrative efforts where the legislature has been inactive, they've either enacted emergency rules, which we'll discuss in a few minutes, or the governor has just issued an executive order. Now that states are starting to come back, and by the way, New Jersey and New York are states that rarely go out of session. They take breaks throughout the year, but their legislative pretty much lasts all year long. But you'll see, so New York is in the middle of their legislative session. You'll see now that they're starting to come back. A lot of bills are starting to become introduced. They will likely parrot what the federal government has already done. Some states are doing their own thing, obviously. But let's get started. So at the beginning of this, Governor Cuomo issued his home order. It's the so-called New York State on Pause initiative. He issued that with guidance. He essentially closed down retail businesses, right? And exempted essential businesses, but they also had a lot of restrictions, right? We want to reduce the workforce, the in-person workforce by 50%. He leaned more favorably to businesses that were able to, work remotely. So that is still in effect. We'll talk a little bit about where that's headed later. First bill I want to talk about, and again, this bill is just in the nascent stages, as many of these bills are. But this is Senate Bill 8239, introduced by Senator Ramos. It's just been read twice, and it's just, it's in the nascent stages of its activity. But this requires certain folks to provide notification. So it says, in relation to requiring employers to notify employees if they come into contact with other employees who have been infected with the virus, that is, that's essentially the coronavirus. So each employer shall notify each employee who has had contact with the infected employee. So in other words, if anyone comes into, you run, I don't know, let's say a hospital, for instance, or let's say even just a widget making shop, someone, one of those employees is sick. If you know that employee has come into contact with other employees, it's your duty, pursuant to this bill, to notify each of those employees that's been in contact with the infected employee. However, that employer shall not reveal the name of the infected employee, and such notification shall be provided in writing in the employee's native language. So again, if the employee is Spanish speaking, you have to let that employee know in writing in that employee's native language. All right, again, that bill has just been introduced at this point. Another bill that's just been introduced at this point is Senate Bill 8110. It has a companion bill. In our world, just means it's a similar bill that's been introduced in the other chamber. So this is a little bit of just a lesson on legislative action and procedure. But bills have to be introduced at some point in both chambers in order for them to pass and be able to get to the governor's desk. So this is a bill. So the previous bill does not have a companion. That doesn't really bode well for it actually getting out and onto the Governor Cuomo's desk. But you never know with these things. Like I said, things are moving pretty slowly as far as the legislature is concerned. All right, so Senate Bill 8810 would create a small business containment assistance program. Essentially, it's allocating $1 million for businesses domiciled in New York State with 10 employees or less. It allows those businesses to borrow money to help pay for expenses, essentially, including rent, payroll, things of that nature. So any revenue that's been lost as a result of the coronavirus, this bill allocates $1 million for certain employers, those with 10 employees or fewer. That would take effect immediately upon Governor Cuomo's signature. Another emergency, there's another, like I mentioned, how, in lieu of legislatures actually passing bills or these various agencies actually proposing rules and, going through this notification process and, having multiple hearings on issues and also having, back and forth with the public about the nature of the rule. A lot of agencies, and this fits with a lot of agencies across the country, they're just passing emergency rules. I would say there have been way more emergency rules and executive orders in comparison to bills that have actually gone through the legislative process, come out, been signed by whatever governor in whatever state. So there's this emergency rule pertains to workers' comp. It essentially expands workers' comp to include coronavirus, so treatment for coronavirus. That obviously was not something that existed in anyone's statute or their rules prior to this year. In a lot of states, you have to actually designate which kinds of conditions can be treated. So now this emergency rule is just making sure that carriers and providers can actually treat coronavirus-related symptoms under their workers' comp rule. So that is in effect today. Next slide, Jason. Great. Another workers' comp bill out there. This is Assembly Bill 10172. This has a Senate companion. Another thing you want to look at, now that I'm giving a civics lesson, in relation to whether a bill has any legs and whether it has any legs to actually get signed by the governor. Most bills don't, but I would say a lot of these bills related to this pandemic probably will, right? Because a lot of these folks, they meet together, they discuss these things. It's unlikely during this type of event that legislators are just proposing bills without having discussed it. In normal times, sure, they discuss bills to scratch various people's itches or to scratch their own itch all the time. But one thing you want to look for is the number of co-sponsors on a particular bill. This one has, it seems like all the assembly, at least 15 co-sponsors. It means that it has a lot of support, right? So what that means is there's probably a good chance that this bill may become enacted. Anyway, this particular bill says that during a state of emergency, a volunteer firefighter or volunteer ambulance worker who's exposed to coronavirus, to pretty much anyone working for a fire department, whether that person is a full-time employee or even a volunteer, it provides a presumption that exposure to coronavirus caused their partial or total disability or even death. So those are workers' comp terms. But what that's really saying is for the people who suffer the worst kinds of injuries from coronavirus and they happen to work for they're a firefighter in some sense of the term, right? They're either voluntary or they're full-time active employee, excuse me. It assumes that even if that firefighter contracted coronavirus, like from his wife or their partner, if they got it at the grocery store, if they got it while jogging outside of work, it's automatically presumed virus at work. Typically, how workers' compensation works, as probably a lot of you know, is that you have to, an employee, a claimant, has to prove that their injury occurred during the course of, or out of the course of, arising out of their actual work. What a lot of these bills are doing, and New York State isn't the only state that is considering these types of rebuttable presumption laws. In fact, I would say probably about half of them have some sort of executive order in place. Their legislature is considering a bill, or there's been an emergency rule that's been adopted based on this particular rebuttable presumption. So this particular bill is limited it to, again, firefighters. And again, that what happens, claimants, is they have to actually prove that their injury, in this case, coronavirus, came out of or resulted from their work with the fire department. In this instance, the employer has to prove that it did not happen during the course of their work. All right, the next bill is another rebuttable presumption bill. This is Senate Bill 8117A. So let's sort of look at this. It has one sponsor, Martinez, but it only has four co-sponsors, right? So there's again, in this game, there aren't any guarantees, right? It's like Tom Brady's down 28-3 in the fourth quarter, right? It's no slam dunk for the Falcons that they're going to win that game. They did. In this case, it doesn't mean just because they only have a limited amount of co-sponsors that the bill won't actually become law, but it's telling you a lot about its prospect. So it creates a presumption that impairment. This one relates to police officers, parole officers, probation officers, that their injury actually occurred during the course of their employment. So pretty much this applies to everyone who has a badge, I would say with the exception of like mall cops, right? So parole officers, probation officers, an officer who works on the LIRR, university police officers, again, anyone who has a badge, pretty much what this bill would say, it's a presumption that they contracted coronavirus during the course of their duties. This bill goes a little further. It says that in cities with a population of less than 1 million, so I would say this probably excludes New York City, that these same folks, these officers, after a receipt of a request for a line of duty sick leave, that they be granted that sick leave. And this doesn't this doesn't take away from their actual accrued sick leave. So if you're in a city that's outside of New York or a town that has less than 1 million citizens, and one of these folks who falls in this category, again, pretty much anyone who has a badge in New York State, and they request sick leave, that they have to be granted that sick leave, and it doesn't take away from their already accrued sick leave. All right. I'm coming to the end of my bills here for New York. Just one more bill I want to talk about. It's Assembly Bill 10348. I think this bill just recently popped up, so I'm not sure of this bill's prospects. But this applies to unemployment insurance, and it essentially says that anyone who has essentially forfeited or through fraud or whatever, or however, whatever other means, their ability to actually be able to get unemployment insurance, that is temporarily waived if they're claiming benefits due to coronavirus. So if you had an employee, or if there was an employee who, I don't know, for some reason forfeited their benefits by, filing like a fraudulent claim or whatever, and that person's actually like been deemed by the state to have forfeited their benefits. If they file benefits related to coronavirus, they can actually get monies from unemployment insurance. But once this is all over, they have to still continue to pay those penalties from the previous forfeiture. So those are just some of the bills that are floating around in New York State. As I've said time and time again on this particular webinar, just because they're introduced doesn't mean that they will become law, right? Certainly some of these will become law. Perhaps all of them will become law. If they're not already law, they might be passed by rule, via emergency rule, or through the normal rule process, or they may become the subject of an executive order. So that's sort of where we've been so far. This is where we are. Probably everybody knows, next slide, Jason, that Governor Cuomo, as of I think about a week or two ago, outlined his steps to completely reopen New York State for business. At this point, the statewide total was about at 280,000 infected folks. So he created an advisory board, and he laid out this plan, which will be implemented in phases and based on regional analysis and determinations. It's going to be based on CDC recommendations. So, and once a region experiences a 14-day decline in the hospitalization rate, they may begin a phased reopening. So it's a number of phases. Phase 1 will include opening construction and manufacturing functions with low risk. Phase 2 will open certain industries based on priority and risk level. Businesses considered more essential with inherent low risk of infection. I would say, maybe your white collar places where folks can still work remotely. I think you'll see that's sort of what they're referring to here. And their customers will be prioritized, followed by businesses considered less essential, are those that present a higher risk of infection spread. And as the rate declines, the pace of reopening businesses will be increased. So there's a lot there. I included a link in case Prestige shares these slides, but you can pretty much type in Governor Cuomo reopen for business and see that plan there. So quite a bit there for New York State. I'll move on to the state of New Jersey. Next slide, Jason. So New Jersey issued their stay-at-home order, went into effect March 21st. I believe they issued this one weekend, and that it went into effect almost immediately. It closed, as you see here, it closed many non-essential retail businesses, right? And it limited the use of public transportation. So one of the first things, this is a little bit different from any other state, right? Because not many states are so heavily reliant on public transportation as some of these states in the tri-state area. So the order also said that all businesses must accommodate their workforce whenever practicable for telework or work from home arrangements, and that those individuals who have to travel to work should only use public transportation if there is no other feasible choice. All right, just one thing I want to mention here, just real quick. So New Jersey's Department of Labor has had issues with their unemployment insurance system. So you naturally, if you're really affected by this virus, you'll have folks who you had to let go because it just doesn't make sense to keep them. You can't just keep them. The unemployment insurance programs or software programs in all 50 states, none of them were designed to handle something of this magnitude, right? I would say on any normal month or week, if let's say 5% of the workforce was let go, these programs would have problem, right? They would be overwhelmed. A lot of times I go into a state to advocate for whatever issue, and they'll say, oh, well, our software system can't handle it. And we're in a building that was built in the 50s, and the software system hasn't been updated since then. So that just tells you, this isn't like the new Apple headquarters, right? They're using software that's old. And a lot of these agencies haven't updated because they just don't have the money to update it. So, but one thing I found of interest was in New Jersey, this really stood out. So they're using, their software system was using COBOL, which is a very antiquated software programming language. And they were actually looking to rehire folks who can actually program Cobalt to help with their unemployment insurance software. So I'm not sure where they are with that. Again, it's like hiring someone to interpret Sanskrit. That's what they're dealing with in New Jersey. But this is an issue, not the Cobalt issue, but like I said, unemployment insurance programs in all 50 states are getting hammered, right? They're just people who filed a month ago still haven't received money that they were owed a month ago. So that's what we're dealing with a little bit in some of these states. I'm going to move on and talk about some of the some of the bills in New Jersey. So one bill I found of interest, Assembly Bill 3846. You'll see that this is passed both chambers. All that's left really right now is for Governor Murphy to actually sign the bills. Another civics lesson here. Even if Governor Murphy doesn't sign the bill, doesn't necessarily mean that the bill won't become effective. What happens is sometimes these bills will, pretty much in every state, if a bill passes both chambers and the governor doesn't sign it, the bill automatically becomes enacted at, like, say, after 21 days or a month or whatever. So it's more likely than not that Governor Murphy is going to sign it. This bill was introduced by Senator Madden. On the other side, Annette Quijano, they're pretty much power brokers in the New Jersey legislature. I believe Senator Madden chairs the Labor Committee, and I think Assemblywoman Quijano chairs the Labor Committee on the Assembly side. So when those kind of things happen, it's pretty much a foregone conclusion that's going to get signed. Enough of that. Let's talk about what the bill actually says. So this bill creates a temporary lost wage unemployment program, the purpose of which is to provide relief to individuals who have lost wages as a result of the coronavirus. And it allows employers to pay wages to workers who are ordered, under quarantine by a licensed health practitioner. Essentially, this affected employees are owed their average weekly wage if the individuals do not have fully paid leave, and to employers who pay wages to workers who are under quarantine. Okay, so we talked about this a couple of minutes ago as far as New York was concerned. I think they allocated about $1 million for certain areas. This bill allocates $10 million, so 10 times the amount, and it leaves open the possibility for that to be increased. So that's a pretty important bill out there. Again, employees who are affected have to file an application on a form approved by the Commissioner of Labor and Workforce Development. So just a quick note about that. I worked on a bill a couple of years ago in New Jersey that required the Commissioner of Labor to create a form so that our companies could use to notify them. That was a couple of years ago. We're still waiting for that notification. I would suspect, because of this pandemic and just sort of the vastness of this issue, that they will probably, if they haven't created something already, it'll be ready to go fairly soon. Next bill, Assembly Bill 3933. You'll see here that it was recently introduced, and it deals with the workers' comp. So similar to New York, as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, and as I talked about how these rebuttable presumption bills are sort of, they're popping up everywhere in pretty much every state in the union. This is another rebuttable presumption bill. This again applies to, partial disability, death benefits, but it applies to a volunteer or paid fire or police department in force, volunteer first aid or rescue squad, any special reserve or auxiliary policeman doing volunteer duty, any recognized emergency management member doing volunteer duty. So again, it provides a presumption that if those people become infected with coronavirus, that it happened at work, it's up to the employer to challenge that presumption in court. So that's that bill. I'll go to Assembly Bill 3848. Jason, am I doing okay on time?
You're doing great. Thank you.
Okay, I only have a couple more bills. I'll wrap up fairly quickly because I think I told you I'd go about 15 minutes. I'm almost at 30 probably. So Assembly Bill 3848. And again, what I did was there are probably some bills that I left off that I didn't think were as pertinent. So there are a couple of bills out there that I didn't mention, both in New York and New Jersey. But I thought this one was of interest. Again, this is a bill that's been sponsored by 10 folks, right? And I see some pretty big names on here. It's sponsored by 10 folks, co-sponsored by another 20, right? And this concerns time off from work to deal with coronavirus or infectious disease. This bill prohibits an employer from terminating or refusing to reinstate an employee if the employee requests or takes time off work based on a written recommendation from a medical professional licensed in New Jersey. So in other words, if you have an employee, doesn't appear to matter the size of your business, who takes time off because they have symptoms of coronavirus, or they have coronavirus, they have a note from their doctor who's licensed in New Jersey, you can't deny them, you can't fire them for taking that time off, right? And you can't not reinstate, you can't refuse to reinstate them once they recover and come back from the coronavirus. So that's a bill I found of interest. Just want to talk real quick about the Senate Bill 2304. It concerns paid family leave. It assures, and by the way, I'm not sure where this bill is. I don't know if this bill, I think that bill that I just discussed will probably make its way into law. Not so sure about this one. It says that that workers impacted by epidemics of communicable diseases, essentially coronavirus, have access to leave needed to care for themselves or affected members of their families. It also, so this just sort of expands paid family leave to include coronavirus, right? So typically it might include things like certain illnesses or maybe domestic violence, things of that nature. But this is now being amended to include coronavirus. Also of note, the bill eliminates the current 1 week waiting period for disability benefits in the indicated epidemic related cases. So this is an exception for coronavirus. It eliminates the current 1 week waiting period, not so much for pretty much anything else. And the last bill I think I want to mention is Senate Bill 2339. This concerns unemployment insurance. So one thing you should know about unemployment insurance, or like the law in New Jersey, is that for employers of with fewer than 30 workers, there wasn't necessarily a right to reinstate employment. This bill changes that. It also increases the amount of UI benefits from 20% of the workers' weekly UI benefit to half of the workers' weekly UI benefit amount. So it's increasing UI benefit. It says that workers or employers with fewer than 30 workers, now they can't refuse to rehire folks after they come back, and they can't retaliate them at all. So next slide, my final slide here. So New Jersey also has outlined a plan to come back. I think you know that most of these states are pretty much lockstep. They're going to do some of the same things. They're looking at similar metrics in order to come back. Governor Murphy, he announced his road back. That was April 27th. I believe this is probably a day after Governor Cuomo did the same. He has 6 principles. Essentially, it's the same thing as New York, right? The first is demonstrating sustained reductions in new coronavirus cases and hospitalizations. So they're looking at 14-day trend lines to show a sustained drop in coronavirus cases. The next principle is to expand testing capacity. Principle 3 is to implement robust contact tracing. Principle 4 is to secure safe places. So for those folks who do test positive in the future, to make sure essentially that they quarantine themselves. Principle 5 is to execute a responsible economic restart. This is going to include, I think this is really important for the folks on this call, this is going to include the continuation of social distancing measures and requirements for face covering. So that isn't going away, even if the virus starts to wane in certain areas of New Jersey, right? Folks are still going to be required to wear those face masks. Those aren't going anywhere. If you have kids, I can tell you, Disney's now selling them, and my kids love them. They got like a Marvel one, and well, my 2 girls got the Disney Princess, which is sort of predictable, but they have a lot of great options. Last one is to ensure New Jersey's resiliency, ensure hospitals, healthcare systems, all these, there's enough personal protective equipment. So that's number 6. That's all my time. So I'll give you my contact information if you have any questions. My email address is dharris@napio.org, DHARRIS@napio.org. Contact me if you have any questions. So Jason, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate your updates. They were extremely informative and clearly relevant to what we're doing today, and it is really nice to have you set aside some time to join us on this webinar. This is exactly this is exactly the type of things that Prestige really focuses on, not just within our clientele and obviously more than just the 2 states that we have here, but also within the NAPIO community. And I know we were trying to get Andy Lubash on the line. He definitely wanted to have the opportunity to speak with everyone, but it's also, great to be able to have Andy as the chair, and with all of the participation and coordination he does with NAPIO, it provides us with, I'd like to say, a step ahead of the industry and the business world to be able to provide a lot of this information and guidance to everybody on the call here today. So again, Daniel, thank you for your insight. It is greatly valued. And at this point, I am going to pass things over to Carol, who's going to give us some updates on loan forgiveness before I get into some return to work items.
Thank you very much, Jason. Yeah, there are some updates to the loan forgiveness, but I'm going to go over the basic procedure to start with. As you all know, there is an 8-week covered period that begins the day the loan is dispersed. There has been additional guidance released. Your bank is required to disperse the full amount in one lump sum within 10 days of approval. Those are the rules set by the SBA. There is no postponing or deferring the disbursement until a better time for you. The legislation was meant to get this money in the pockets of workers immediately, and so those are the regulations. Now, for the forgiveness guidelines, at least, and please I'm pointing out, at least 75% of the loan proceeds must be spent on payroll costs. Can you spend more than 75%? Absolutely. But the way the loan was set up was it took your payroll costs, benefits, all of those other things, and then gave you a little bit more to cover rent and utilities. You can't keep people at work if you don't have a place to put them or have the lights on. Now, your loan forgiveness is affected by headcount and individual salaries. So first, we'll discuss the headcount issue that has been discussed a great deal. There are your 8-week covered period, your headcount during that time, will be compared to 2 test periods. Dates are on the screen, February 15th through 2019, February 15th, 2019 through June 30th, 2019, or January 1st, 2020 through February 29th, 2020. You get to make the decision. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, how do I know which period to use? Well, we have a report for that. Please contact your payroll specialist. We have a specifically designed FTE report that will show you your FTE count for both of those periods, so you will know which period you're going to want to choose. Obviously, it will be the smaller number, and you now know what FTE number you need to hit to get your full forgiveness. How does the math work? I went through the math last week, a little more exact, but have found a simpler way to say it. A 10% reduction in headcount will reduce your forgiveness by 10%. So if you had 10 employees in your test period and only 9 in your covered period, that's a 10% reduction. The forgiveness will be reduced by 10%. It gets a little more complicated here because they want you paying, the legislation is set up, they want you paying your employees the same wages that they were paid in first quarter of 2020. This specifically applies to people making less than $100,000 a year because anybody above that was cut off at that to begin with in the calculation and therefore also in the forgiveness. Anybody making more than $100,000 per year will be limited to $15,384 for the 8-week covered period. That's 8 weeks at $100,000 a year. We have a report. Once your 8-week covered period is completed, we have a report very similar to the loan report that we gave you. It's a little bit different. It shows the cap on cash wages a little differently and a little more clear for your banks to be able to look at. But once your 8-week covered period is done, you will be able to get that report to know exactly what you spent to submit your paperwork to the bank. We'll continue. Next slide. Getting my thoughts ahead of myself. There is one provision within the CARES Act, and we're not exactly sure specifically how it's going to work. It specifically states that your forgiveness is calculated without regard to headcount or wage reduction if employees that were laid off between February 15th and April 15th of this year are rehired by June 30th. Well, that's an interesting date because for many of you, your 8-week period ends before June 30th. So those people haven't gotten back onto payroll, haven't been paid. We don't have any further guidance from SBA or Treasury on how that provision within the CARES Act is going to be documented and affect the forgiveness amount. Other things to remember, your forgiveness applications are going to be submitted and approved by your bank or lender. This is not an SBA approval process, it is the bank. The loan forgiveness amount that's been stated by the IRS will not be considered as income. We don't have any guidance from any of the states yet. But Treasury has also announced, Steve Mnuchin has been in the news, that the expenses associated with these forgiven loans are also not eligible for a tax deduction. There is really some true logic to this. The federal government gave you money to pay these employees. If the money's not going to be income, the expenses don't get to be deducted either. I don't see any bending on this. There are some groups that are lobbying to have that changed. I don't expect to see a change in that. So that will need to be forefront in everyone's mind come end of the year when you're preparing your corporate tax return. So what's our current situation? SBA missed the deadline. The deadline was April 28th, 26th, around that time. We don't have any additional guidance yet. There are many banking groups that are pushing SBA and Treasury to create a standard forgiveness form for all borrowers. The AICPA has also gotten involved, and they're taking a tack that's we've had a lot of questions about because you all ask, is it pay period or pay date? Right now, we're relatively sure it's going to be pay date, and AICPA is pushing for it to be considered the pay period. Once again, unfortunately, when you're rushing legislation out to get money in the pockets of the workers of America, not every little point is thought through. So unfortunately, while using pay period would have been the better option, it may well be pay date. I do recommend that all of you, as you are spending down your loan proceeds, please speak to your banks. Your bank is the one that will be processing, see what their thoughts are, if they have received guidance. We do our very best to stay on top of all of the updates that are given by SBA and Treasury. And I will actually be discussing a few of those items when we get to the frequently asked questions at the end of the presentation. But for now, I will turn it over to Jason to discuss returning to work.
Thank you, Carol. Your updates on the Paycheck Protection Program are always appreciated. And obviously, there's always information to disseminate and to update, so we do appreciate the updates that you put together for us today. So let's get into return to work. Personally, this is a topic that I've been excited to talk about for some time because, honestly, it means that we're starting to come out on the other side, at least in some fashion. So don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of work to do, and it's not going to happen overnight, but at least we are pushing that needle in the right direction. So it's important to remember that while we're seeing more and more states starting to reopen and function and go in a positive direction, New York State does remain on pause through May 15th. Which means that all non-essential workers are directed to work from home, and everyone's required to wear a face covering and maintain a 6-foot distance from others in public. Like I mentioned, this is going to be a progression. It's going to be a slow move back to, instilling what we perceived to be normal functions back into our lives. So as mentioned earlier on in the presentation, non-essential businesses are to remain closed, not only for New York, but also for New Jersey and Connecticut. The stay-at-home order for Connecticut remains in effect through May 20th, while New Jersey's stay-at-home order is in effect until further notice. And as I just mentioned, New York is still in effect until May 15th. As we've learned recently, all K through 12 schools and colleges within the state of New York will remain closed through the academic school year while they continue to conduct distance learning. For those of you with young children at home, my thoughts and prayers are with you. Mine are teenagers. It's a bit easier, but I do feel for those who have to go through the homeschooling with their children. Also, Governor Cuomo issued Executive Orders 202.17 and 202.18 requiring all people in New York to wear masks or face coverings in public, including when taking public or private transportation or riding in for-hire vehicles. All of these things are going to help to slow the spread as we get back into the workforce more and more. Now, the state is partnering with the Kate Spade New York Foundation and Crisis Text Line to provide a 24/7 emotional support service for frontline healthcare workers. This is really nice to see. Obviously, there's a lot to think about with respect to stopping the spread and containing the virus, but there is a deep focus on providing this emotional support to not just frontline workers, but all workers. So the frontline workers can use the text New York Frontline to the number 741-741 to access these emotional support services. And New Yorkers can call the COVID-19 emotional support hotline at 1-844-863-9314 for mental health counseling. Now, it's important to note New Jersey and Connecticut also do have return to work protocols in place, and you can find all of the state-specific information on their state government websites. We spend a lot of time on those websites, and they're doing a fantastic job with making sure they're maintained and updated with relevant information. So now that we know what the states are preparing for, it's important that employers start thinking about putting a plan in place to bring back their own employees. There are a number of considerations that employers must be mindful of. It's not as simple as just calling employees back to work and going back to the way things were. As great as that would be, it's a different world now. So the first step has always been to stay informed, and this is what we're doing week in and week out. For those of you that are with us today, you're off to a great start. First, you're going to need to organize. Create a task force to oversee the implementation of your return to work plan. It's important to involve key decision makers within the organization as well as managers to help push that needle forward. The task force must stay current on all federal, state, and local guidance as it pertains to the workplace and continue to monitor the Centers for Disease Control, the WHO, webinars such as this one, and obviously OSHA websites for insight relative to navigating COVID-related issues for employees. Also, we ask that you explore any COVID-19 plans that your community may be putting in place. Local conditions may have a significant impact on your business operations. The recent development of closing schools down for the year could also have an impact on an employee's ability to return to work, and that's something that we're going to dig into a little bit in just a couple slides. For those who have been on these webinars, you've heard me talk a lot about communication. There's no better time than now to ramp up your communication with your employees. It's very likely that you're going to need to modify or amend your business practices, so it's important that you do remain flexible with the information that you put out there and your policies. After reviewing your business needs and determining a course of action, you should then prepare a communication to send to your employees that addresses or clarifies the guidelines around their return to work. There's a number of things that this may include. One, the continuation of employees working remotely while also implementing a staggered schedule. Again, we're going to talk more about the alternative schedules or staggered schedules in just a bit. However, this may be effective at increasing the physical distance between employees. Great segue into social distancing requirements. This is going to be different or difficult in an office setting, which normally has people or employees sitting close to each other. In addition to changes in schedules, as we discussed above, you should also limit all hands-on meetings, employee offsites, as well as customer events. Reviewing expectations and requirements around hygiene in the workplace is also extremely important. Providing employees with hand sanitizer and other disinfectant products at their workstations for individual use will go a long way to containing the spread. Also ensuring that hand sanitizers and disinfectant wipes are also readily available and restocked regularly for high traffic areas. The plan should also review the availability of company vacation and standard paid sick leave under your company policies. This PTO time may need to be used by employees, and it's important that they understand the policy. You should also be prepared for an onslaught of vacation requests. As employees are getting back into the swing of things, they're going to want to start scheduling their time off. So if you get caught off guard by any of these requests, it could get messy. So it's important to stay consistent with your company policies. And equally as important is detailing a support structure for your employees upon their return to work. Your employees have been exposed to a lot of information, and they are returning to a situation that may provide a lot of anxiety. Providing an outlet for employees to direct their concerns and supporting that open communication can certainly help to ease that transition. Next slide that I want to talk about is going to be focusing on creating a sound safety plan for the organization to follow. So recently, and the reason why we put this in there, aside from the obvious safety precautions you want to have in place, but more relevant to the business world, we've learned of a group of employees that were concerned about their workplace safety amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, and they just recently filed a legal action against their employer seeking a court order that would require the company to comply with federal safety guidelines. If you operate an essential business or you're already starting to contemplate reopening your doors and ramping up activity, you're going to want to pay particular attention to this lawsuit and any other lawsuits and the standards for being subject to any potential injunction. Being proactive and developing a thorough safety policy plan will now help you avoid legal troubles down the road. So as mentioned in the previous slide, continue to follow federal, state, and local regulations. States are constantly updating their guidelines and regulations regarding the coronavirus. Things are fluid with COVID precautions, and there could be pertinent information that your organization should be following. So definitely keep your ear to the ground, continue to listen to webinars like these, and do your own research. Also consider limitations on non-essential travel. You may want to establish a clear policy regarding limits and restrictions on that business travel. You'll also want to encourage disclosure of personal travel destinations from your employees. As needed, you'll want to consider rearranging office space to ensure that social distancing can be maintained between employees. Again, not an easy task to necessarily do, but something that you should consider. Creating one-way traffic flows, probably similar to what maybe you have seen in the grocery store. Restricting the use of employee lounges and conference rooms. Installing physical barriers between workstations. These are all examples of ways that we can help to rearrange office space to make employees safer and to help, again, contain that spread. You should also consider installing sanitizer dispensers and closing or restricting access to communal spaces such as kitchens, conference rooms, bathrooms, as well as reevaluating office presence as an essential job function. Maintaining that flexibility in your approach for employees who wish to continue to telecommute for a period of time is something that should strongly be considered as well. Continue to communicate basic hygiene prevention measures to employees. This would include things like promoting hand hygiene, frequent hand washing for employees, visitors, customers, providing the necessary essentials, which is soap and water, or of course hand sanitizer with at least 60% alcohol, providing tissues and trash bins to all employees. The next couple of bullet points, focus on developing a policy for identifying and isolating the sick or exposed employees. Create a clear policy that will help contain any future occurrences of the virus. You'll also want to develop clear policies for reporting to human resources or management when an employee becomes sick or begins experiencing symptoms. You'll want to ensure the use of PPP, the personal protective equipment, where it's appropriate. So that includes face masks, respiratory protection, gloves, face shields, things of that nature. Also, if possible, you want to encourage your employees to use stairs rather than elevators. These are all just little things that we can certainly implement or at least suggest to help push things along. And lastly, you do want to conduct regular and thorough office cleanings with a focus on those high-touch areas, such as break rooms, time clocks, pantries, kitchens, all the essentials. So the next two slides is where I'm going to wrap up on the return to work section, and it's really just going to go into some details around some of the things that we have discussed over the past couple of slides. Staggered schedules is something that we should certainly be considering. For example, separating employees into A and B groups would certainly help to limit the amount of people within the workplace at the same time. The two groups could split time into the office by alternating weeks, and this would also help to space out the employees in the office to comply with social distancing guidelines. It also helps to manage the office in the event that an employee does contract the COVID-19 virus. And it's one of those things that could be inevitable. If an employee is in one of those groups and they do become ill, you can have that entire group then work remotely for a week or two. After that, you'll want to give the office a thorough cleaning and then have the alternate group come into the office during the isolation time frame. This would help to contain that spread of any COVID virus and also, isolate anyone that's been around it at that time. Moving on to time tracking systems. You may want to consider a few options with this. First, if you're using a physical time clock where employees use their hands or their fingers to clock in, you'll definitely want to put a hand sanitizer near all of those time clocks. You also may want to consider moving toward an app-based or a web-based time tracking process in the interim. Ordering supplies is another one that we should definitely be thinking about. And if you haven't thought about or gone through the process of ordering supplies yet, then I suggest you bump that up to the top of your list. We all know that the delivery time frames are out of whack these days, and it can take a while to receive your shipment. Ask my wife, who's still waiting for her anniversary gift that was ordered weeks and weeks ago. That was an awkward conversation. But, the other problem with that, aside from delivery delays, is that there's a limited supply due to the demand of cleaning supplies. Everybody's looking for this stuff. We all know how hard it was to get gloves or masks at the time when everybody needed it, not just for ourselves, but also for frontline workers. So you'll want to give yourself as much time as possible to secure the necessary cleaning supplies. Lunchtime. Feeding employees. This is something that, in our conversations, not too many people think about, but it's an important one. If you're in an office building that has a cafeteria, they likely will also be putting in social distancing guidelines as well. So between those limitations and your employees changing their own habits, what this could mean is that there's going to be more employees using your kitchen. There could be a glut of employees trying to use that space in your refrigerator. The space in your fridge could be at a premium, and all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of people that aren't used to using that kitchen and that refrigerator trying to use that kitchen and that refrigerator. So you're going to definitely need to reinforce social distancing protocols in the kitchen, as well as practice common etiquette with the refrigerator space. You don't want a whole lot of people rearranging things in the refrigerator, touching everybody's food. Next, you're going to want to establish a protocol for deliveries and office visitations, that keeps some distance from the rest of the employee population. So consider establishing a separate defined space for messengers, food delivery, or other visitors to your office. The last two things we have here, childcare issues, another huge issue that we're going to be running into, if not now, definitely in the near future. We need to be prepared for employees to be limited by the lack of childcare and consider alternate work arrangements, such as the continuation of telework or remote working. The lack of childcare, not just for the school year, but also into the summer, that employees are accustomed to and rely on, just might not be there. Lastly, it's important to understand that there is a likelihood that you'll encounter a case of the coronavirus with one of your employees as we start bringing them back. If an employee has a confirmed case for COVID-19 or has been exposed to someone with a confirmed case, they should not return to the office until they've been cleared by a medical professional, or that they have self-quarantined for a minimum of 14 days following the confirmation of their diagnosis. For confirmed cases of COVID-19, employers should certainly interview the employee to identify other people that they may have come in contact with. You'll want to notify any employees who may have been exposed. Certainly you want to be sure to not identify the person's name, gender, or any other descriptor. We want to keep that behind. Consider sending an email to the entire office site exposing, stating that they've been possibly been exposed to a confirmed case of COVID-19. You may want to consider notifying the public health authorities about any confirmed case of COVID-19. And then finally, if you do have an employee exhibiting flu-like symptoms that are consistent with the coronavirus, you should definitely send them home and direct them to self-quarantine for 14 days. So that wraps up my return to home portion. This is something that Prestige is going to be focusing on, or has been focusing on, and are going to continue to ramp up those focuses. We are preparing communications to go out to everybody, as well as guidelines to follow. So if you do have any questions about how to bring employees back and what you should do and what policies you should follow, please reach out to your HR business partner. Call us anytime. We'd be happy to have that conversation with you. So with that said, I'm going to invite Carol back into the fray here, and we are going to go over some frequently asked questions as we wrap things up.
All right. Thank you very much, Jason. All right.
So, well, if you don't mind.
Not at all, Jason.
So, first question we have here is, can I pay bonuses during the 8 weeks? And again, this is, as it pertains to the loan forgiveness program.
Yeah. Yes, you can pay any wages you want during those 8 weeks, but you need to be careful about that $100,000 per year cap that becomes involved. So, unfortunately, I always throw in some numbers in my presentations. So if you have an employee that has annual salary of $85,000 a year, that means for the 8 weeks, it'll be $13,000 and change. So you have some additional, you're worried about spending all your funds. I'm going to give employees a $3,000 bonus. First of all, thank you very much. That's wonderful for your employees. But at that point, you're now putting the wages for that employee at $16,000 and change. Well, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, and I've quoted this number to any of you who have called me, the most wages for any single employee is $15,384. So by paying this bonus, you now have an amount that's not going to be forgiven because you have gone over the $100,000 per year cap just for that 8-week period. I don't believe they're going to have the capability of annualizing that to bring you back under the cap. Next question.
All right. Next question we have here is, my company has a shared work program. Will this affect loan forgiveness?
Yes, it will, because a shared work program in essence is, for example, paying an employee for 3 days, working 3 days, and then the other 2 days go on unemployment. New York State has a huge shared work program. You're now paying that employee 40% less per week than what you did before. So that will limit your loan forgiveness. Once again, this loan program was to put the money in the pockets of workers based on what they were getting paid before.
All right. Next question we have here is, what insurance premiums are eligible payroll costs for purposes of the loan?
Standard group health care benefit premiums are included in the eligible payroll costs. That's your medical, vision, and dental coverages.
All right, next question is, can loan proceeds be used for the Prestige PEO admin fees or workers' compensation fees?
These are not qualified expenses under the loan. Again, the only thing outside of true wages and benefits was rent and utilities. And so anything else is not considered a qualified expense for the loan.
All right, next question we have here is, one of the employees I laid off has refused to report to work after rehire. Will this affect my loan forgiveness?
This is actually brand new guidance that was just released. That's part of the reason why I included it. So once again, I want to reassure you that we are watching all of the agencies for new updates and new information as it comes out. If an employee refuses a written offer of employment, that will not go against your head count. The conversation you can then have with that employee regarding their unemployment claims is another subject, but it will not affect your head count for the forgiveness application.
All right. Can we use the loan funds for my K-1 earnings?
K-1 payments to shareholders, S-Corp shareholders, and to partners are not considered wages. I did have a phone call the other day with a sole proprietor which of course is not a K-1, sole proprietors are on Schedule C, there is a provision for income to be paid to that sole proprietor to be considered in loan forgiveness. So I just wanted to add that, but K-1 earnings are not a qualified expense.
Okay. So next question we have here is, sick or family leave wages paid under the FFCRA are not eligible for loan forgiveness. To not impact forgiveness, should an employer pay regular sick time?
That's up to each employer. I mean, the FFCRA sick and family leave wage tax credits are awesome. They are a dollar-for-dollar tax credit for the wages that you need to pay, especially to the people who are out sick, the people who are out caring for someone who's sick, and at least while school is open, to people home caring for their children. If you decide to not use those additional pay codes and you want to pay just regular sick pay to these individuals, keep in mind you cannot reduce their PTO bank for that sick time. That was part of the reason why the FFCRA came out with these pay codes, to essentially give everybody an extra 10 sick days due to this illness. So it is up to your choice.
All right, the next question states, will the SBA review individual PPP loan files?
Steve Mnuchin has come out. All loans for $2 million or more will be reviewed. And he did add and said, in addition to other loans as appropriate following the lender's submission of loan forgiveness documents. Anybody's loan can get pulled at this point. They have not hinted at what guidance they will use or how they will pick any loans under $2 million to be looked at, but they are talking nonstop about the fact that these loan programs were there for companies that needed them. And I'm sure you've all been watching the news and have seen some companies give the money back because the definition of need may or may not have been met. So we don't know which loans might be looked at.
All right. Yeah, as we wrap up, the next few questions are revolving around benefits and the COBRA process, and I can handle these, Carol. But a question that came in here is, as I rehire employees, do they need to wait the normal waiting period before they are offered benefits again? So the quick answer is no. An employee that's rehired can be offered benefits, without a waiting period, right? So nothing we're doing right now is what I classify as normal. So what we're trying to do here at Prestige is make things as easy as possible for employees and employers to get acclimated back to, what I perceive as some type of normal workspace. And anything that we can do to help push that along, we're certainly going to do. But the answer to that is no. You do not have to be offered without a waiting period. Next question is, can employees that have been rehired make changes to the plans they had in place before they were terminated? Answer to that would be yes. Employees can certainly select and change plans not previously elected. We always urge employees to reach out to their benefit specialists to review any types of changes or options that they may have, and the benefit specialist can definitely help walk you through that process. Can an employer pay for COBRA for the employees that have been laid off? Simply put, the employer may decide to pay for COBRA. Like with anything else, you do not want to discriminate against any one or group of employees, and you must pay for all employees electing COBRA and not just select individuals. Last question we have here is, my employees were furloughed and their benefits remained active. Can I collect the portion the employer was responsible for through payroll when they are returned to full-time status? So when the employee does return to full-time status, deductions for the benefits can be taken through payroll and spread out over a period of time or several pay periods. This helps to bring that arrears back, that cost down, so that it's more palatable for employees to to take moving forward, but it definitely can be set up through payroll and spread out for the employees. And that wraps up our 6th webinar. So again, apologize for the technical difficulties we had in the beginning. Gladly we were able to sort all that out. I did want to thank everybody for taking some time out of their day to join this update and our webinar. You know, as I mentioned, always we're working hard to get the information out to you. You know, continue to reach out to your daily support here at Prestige, your HRBPs, payroll, and benefit specialists, and we'll continue to send those weekly updates out to everyone. Again, everything that we talk about here, including this presentation, the slideshow, as well as the recording, can be found in our COVID-19 Resource Center on the Prestige PEO website. Again, this is constantly updated, so please reach out to that website for additional information. And I also urge everyone to hop onto the Prestige Go mobile app, which will link you directly with your dedicated support team. So thank you again, everybody, for taking the time to sit with us today, and I hope you have a fantastic Wednesday.